of it at different parks. So I thought, oh, perfect. So I sent a request back again saying that I was a published author, and I requested an exemption, and I wanted the list of missing people utilizing what you just quoted. I got a response back that they would have to go into the archives and form a list, and it would cost me $34,000 for the list from Yosemite.
Just from Yosemite?
Just Yosemite.
Which means it must be a fairly big list. I mean, $34,000 is a lot of money, but you're going to be talking millions of dollars for the rest of the country. Am I right?
$1.4 million for the entire park system.
Now, isn't this astonishing irresponsibility on the part of the Park Service to not keep lists of missing people? And if they do keep secret lists, then the fact that those lists are secret is putting the Park Service ahead of the lives of its own patrons. They care more about the Park Service than they do about the people who go to the parks.
So the Park Service knew what was coming because we filed probably 50 FOIAs against them in the last 3.5, 4 years on various people that have disappeared, on lists like this, etc. They knew what we were doing. So it's a calculated decision on their part to hold back on those lists. Apparently, and we discussed this at length, apparently the fallout from what we're talking about right now and what I've talked about on other shows must be less than the fallout would be if they released those lists.
Well, of course it is, because if they released the lists, then the public would know to take the kind of simple precautions that you suggest in the book. When you say a transponder, by the way, you suggest hiking the parks and so forth and so on in pairs, and you suggest the use of a transponder. What do you mean by a transponder?
Well, years ago, the first transponders that were out, my dad had a plane and we used to carry it, and it looked like a giant kind of hand phone, and if the plane ever crashed in the wilderness, my dad taught us, hey, sometimes the crash itself would set off the transponder. It goes to a satellite, and it tells search and rescue officials that a plane crashed, and they'll hone in on the signal and find you. The same sort of technology exists for hikers in the wilderness now, and it's so cost effective at this point that anyone could really go out and buy one for $100. And if you get hurt or you're injured, you could just press the transponder, and eventually you get found. Now, the interesting thing about that, out of all the cases I ever researched, there was only one guy that disappeared. He was found in a really, really weird area, and they found him because of that transponder. It didn't save his life, but they did find him, and I don't think they ever would have found this guy without it. And it's a really, really rare event when two people, especially two adults, disappear simultaneously. And I think that there must be some rationale to that. So hiking together, using a transponder, I think covers a lot more of those bases and gives you a better chance of getting found alive than not.
Well, yeah. Tell us about this. Where was this man found?
So on the outskirts of Yosemite, there's several different wilderness areas. And for the people who have never been there, there's a lot of spires, crags, cliffy areas. So right before the transponder goes off, a storm comes into the area, and I mean there's lightning, rain, etc. And anyone who's a hiker knows you don't go up to the top of peaks and mountains, especially during a thunderstorm in the mountains. That's the worst place to go.
Right.
Not only did this guy go to the top of the mountain, it was not only raining and thundering, but he did, and then he ended up in the bottom of one of these crags, spires, in a small little tiny valley where the chances of being found by a search and rescue team without that transponder are zero. And the only reason they did find him is because a search plane with a transponder receiver flew exactly over the spot and was able to pick him up. It was very unusual.
Well, yeah, because what in the world was he doing there? Storms play a surprising role in this, just in general. Is that correct?
An amazing part in all of this. It almost seems as though there's some intellect involved at some level where right before or right person disappears, there's a major storm, and sometimes these storms go on for days. And
yeah, that is very creepy. But go ahead.
Yeah, no, it does cause obvious troubles for the search and rescue teams, but it seems that it happens more times than not. And in researching hundreds of these cases, it's something that just keeps raising its head every time, and it's weird.
Yeah, I should say so, because it's almost like there's somebody who can cause the storms, dare I say that, in order to cover the tracks?
Well, we thought about that, and then we thought the other thing is that there's certain animals, and there's obviously fish that understand changes in barometric pressure. And maybe there was a time in our lives way back when where we could as well, but maybe it's that change in barometric pressure that somehow something somewhere realizes that a storm's about to come. I don't know.
It's absolutely eerie. Folks, when we get back, we're going to talk about a new case that has just started to develop, the Micah True case. It's quite remarkable case. When we get back with Dave Paulides, Missing 411, and you can get more deeply into this if you're concerned about a missing person or you want to protect yourself by being careful about where you go. Go to canammissing.com, canammissing.com. We'll be right back.
Dreamland subscribers, don't miss the live chat with Whitley Strieber in the Unknown Country chat rooms Wednesday at 7 p.m. Pacific Time.
Beyond the live chats in the unknowncountry.com subscriber section, which are themselves great and a lot of fun, we also offer a huge archive going back all the way to 2004. In this archive is an absolutely fascinating Dreamland with Alan Lammers about missing persons in Indonesia. It is hair-curling, so maybe now is the time for you to go to unknowncountry.com, click on that subscribe tab, and subscribe now. $12.95 brings you 3 months. It's one of the least expensive and very best subscription offerings of its kind online. Do it today. You've been listening to this show for a long time. Now, do a little give back. Get on board. It's fun, and it gives you a great feeling to know you're helping Unknown Country and Dreamland keep on keeping on. I've been thinking about attending the Dreamland Festival. You better hurry and get your tickets. We're down to just 28 seats left, so it's time to make your decision. And if you're an unknowncountry.com subscriber, you get an additional 10% off. Very well worth doing. Wondering what a festival is like. Now let's listen to what a participant in an earlier Dreamland Festival thought about what it was like. Tell us about the presentations, why don't you?
It's almost like the presentations took on a three-dimensional quality that you just don't get when you're reading this material. To have the person presenting it live gives it a level of intricacy that you don't get when you're just reading a book, and also to be able to ask questions on the spot is, again, it's invaluable.
The Dreamland Festival, as unique as this programming, as unique as the people who make Dreamland happen, as unique as unknowncountry.com. Don't miss it this year. Go to unknowncountry.com, click on the store tab, get your tickets today.
This is Whitley Strieber's Dreamland. We go deeper.
This is Whitley Strieber. We're talking to Dave Paulides. We're talking to him about missing persons. He did an extraordinary show on Coast to Coast AM a few nights ago. I listened to every word of it, and I was riveted. And we're going a little deeper today on Dreamland into this whole issue. And for subscribers, we're going to be talking about some very, very strange stuff. Bigfoot, possible alien abductions, an intelligence behind this, or just exactly what is it that is causing all of these very, very strange cases. Before we left the air, I was just mentioning the case, Dave, I'm sure of Micah True. Tell us a little bit about Micah and his background.
Micah was a long-distance cross-country marathoner who was in phenomenal shape. This guy made a career out of running the backwoods, mountains, country roads of Mexico and the U.S., and he had worldwide fame for his age. He was 58, but he probably looked 40 or younger. He was running in the Gila, Gila wilderness.
Right.
And he disappeared. And he and his family were staying at a nearby lodge. And normally, Micah took his dog with him when he ran, and for some reason that day, he didn't. And he had ran these woods dozens of times before, so he knew him. And he didn't come back in his normal time, and people started to look for him. And up until just recently, they hadn't let go with much information about it. Other than he had disappeared, they found his body near a creek. Well, just recently, more information has come out. They stated that they found him half sitting, half in the creek, half on the bank. One shoe was off. There were severe bruises and scratches on his body, and an autopsy is pending. So if you read my books, this is a really, really common scenario to find somebody who had been missing, meaning both shoes are gone or off their feet. Second thing is that there's severe scratching or bruising on the body. They're found in an area they're not supposed to be, and the entire scenario really, on its surface, doesn't fit the mold of any common sense based on the person's profile.
And the feet, the strange thing about the feet, I have to tell you that a creepy feeling went off my spine when I read about this in the latest stories about it, because I thought immediately of the feet being found in shoes on the coast of British Columbia. And I thought, is there some kind of bizarre connection here? What could be going on? It's almost as if there is something doing this. Could it be insane? Well, obviously, I mean, you just have to wonder.
You can get a lot more accomplished sitting around talking as a group of people than one person sitting in the room alone. And we've all known researchers that work alone. And I learned a long time ago when I worked on teams on the police department that solving big issues, you need a bunch of free thinkers sitting together talking about it. And luckily, in our group, we've got that. And one of the guys came up with the idea and said, well, if you were in the middle of the wilderness and somebody took your shoes, you're limited in how fast you're going to run and how far you're going to go. And I thought, wow, that's a good thought.
That's right. So maybe that somebody is trapping them by taking their shoes.
It was one thought that was come up with, and I have no idea.
So odd. Dave, I want to go on now and to start talking a little bit about some of these clusters, and to tell us where the clusters are taking place, if you will.
So first of all, we really don't know all of the missing people in the park system because they won't tell us. But what we did do is we went out to many of these locations, sat in libraries near the parks, and scoured archives trying to understand the magnitude. And you can't find everything everywhere, and I know we didn't, I'll admit it. But we did find the biggest cluster in the Park Service we can find is Yosemite. Yeah, and they have some of the most bizarre disappearances you will ever find anywhere. But one of the more troubling places that we found a cluster of disappearances was Crater Lake National Park. And what bothers me about that as being a dad of a son and daughter is that there's a group of missing boys, 10 and under, in remote areas of Crater Lake that don't make any sense at all. predator would be sitting around behind a tree waiting to grab somebody and take them, because that's almost as though something similar to that has to be taken that we just don't understand, because these boys disappeared in places where cars can't really get to in most instances. They disappear so quickly it's beyond any rational understanding of what it could be. There's a consistency to it. If you go further north in the Cascade Mountain Range, there's another cluster of boys missing in the North Cascades just south of the Canadian border in Washington. Again, in the middle of the wilderness, in the middle of nowhere, these kids have disappeared. And the strange thing about these boys that disappear is they are never found, which is really an uncommon thing if you look at the magnitude of search and rescue. Most people are found eventually. These boys are never found. So there's 28 clusters that we've identified in the United States and Canada. There's an area right in the middle of the U.S. where there are absolutely no clusters, which is an unusual feat. It's almost as though there's a demilitarized zone in the U.S.
How strange. And, we're going to take another little break here, and when we get back, we'll talk about the significance of that area and exactly what makes it different from the rest of the country. We'll be right back. One of those popular members of the Dreamland team is Jim Mars, and Jim's got, just listen to what he's got planned.
Howdy. It'd be my pleasure to tell all my fans and friends about who or what is trying to gain control over the earth. The leaders of the New World Order make it very plain that they want to reduce the world's population. So now, wait a minute. Why would you want to wreck the environment and kill off everybody on the planet, which is the mainstay of wealth and power, unless we have to ask ourselves, are they even us? I'll present some really interesting evidence to show that thousands of years ago, by many, many compelling accounts, there were extraterrestrials, or at least non-humans. Well, did they all leave, or are they still here? We'll explore that question when I talk at the Dreamland Festival.
This gives us just a taste of what Jim Mars's next book is going to be about, the occulting of America. At the Dreamland Festival, you'll find out more. Go to unknowncountry.com, click on the sales point for the Dreamland Festival on the upper right, and get your tickets today. This is Whitley Strieber. We're talking to Dave Paulides about his book and two books, Missing 411. You can get to Dave at his website, canammissing.com, CANAMMISSING.com. He's also got an absolutely terrific Bigfoot research website, nabigfootresearch.com. He's one of the premier Bigfoot researchers in the country. Now, David, when we left the air, we were starting to talk about the central United States and the fact that there's very little of this in the central part of the country. And what about a place like Texas? Has got a lot of wilderness, a lot of treacherous wilderness.
So specifically, Texas and Florida were excluded from the book because, honestly, I could write 2 volumes on Texas and on Florida. There are that many missing people from those 2 states under very unusual circumstances. So this manuscript, when I finished, was so large that we had to split it between the western U.S., which was released in early March, the eastern U.S., which will be released in April. So right now, Florida and Texas are not included.
So you literally can't include them. It doesn't surprise me too much, being from Texas as I am. I know the state really well, and I've been in some pretty hairy areas, but I'll bet there are cases in Texas and in Florida, I'm sure there would be in both states, which have got very dense, deep wildernesses, which are quite spectacularly strange. And I wonder if you can tell us about any particular cases that might jump to mind from these 2 states.
You know, Whitley, it's so hard to keep track of the 411 we did in the West and the East that I honestly kind of purged those Texas and Florida cases out of my mind And I had a difficult enough time just trying to keep track of the 411 I wrote about.
Oh, I see. Okay, well, fine. I can certainly understand that. So we've got plenty of cases to talk about. Being from Texas, I was immediately interested. But you said that there was a large part of the central United States where this doesn't seem to be happening. And tell us a little bit about what parts of the country seem safe from this.
Well, I always hate the word safe, but mainly I would start with western Oklahoma, say anywhere from just east of Oklahoma City going all the way west, then going almost straight north from there, all the way up through North Dakota, South Dakota, right through the heart of the U.S. And I mean, in both books, I include a very small map of the U.S. that shows the clusters, but you can see that almost right down the middle of the U.S., there's nothing, and it's really odd.
Well, I know western Oklahoma and the Dakotas also pretty well. I've been out in the wilderness a good bit, and, those places are wild, just as wild as West Texas. Wilder, in fact, the Dakotas.
Absolutely.
So, what's the deal?
I wish I understood.
It would be very reassuring, but I think maybe I'm going to confine my hiking from now on to the Black Hills. The Black Hills are a wild place, and you're saying there's not much there in terms of disappearances?
Not that fit the criteria of what we were looking for. And again, it's the disappearance without a witness, and the person, or there is evidence of other similar disappearances in that immediate area. There's no disappearance that we cited that was in relationship or could be associated with a criminal event per se. Also, none of the disappearances could deal with a possibility that water took the people away. If I can diverge for a second, there's a story we talked about in the Rocky Mountain National Park. An individual named Alfred Beelarts that disappeared in 1930. And Alfred was a very small boy, 2 years old, and he was camping with his mom and dad along a river in the middle of the national park. And they were starting to walk up the side of the river, and Alfred got behind his parents just a little bit, and he disappeared. And the parents Alfred was 4 years old. This was in 7/2/1938. Alfred, his parents thought he fell into the river, but they weren't sure, and they didn't think so because they would have heard something, because this isn't a huge river. And the Park Service came out, and immediately they focused on the water, as is normal in search and rescue.
Right.
And they went to the point of getting permission to shut down the river. They dammed it, and they searched under every boulder going downstream for 3.5 miles. They didn't find anything. So then they think, well, maybe we ought to start looking on the land. So a couple days later, they bring in some canines, and they track it uphill, which is weird, because if you know anything about search and rescue, small children and most people walk downhill when they're lost. Well, they went uphill. Canines went uphill for about 1,000 feet. They stopped at a fork in the trail, and the dogs sat down and said, well, that's enough. We're not going any further, which is odd canine behavior. And the other thing you'll find in a lot of these cases is that dogs, whether they're dogs with the people that disappear or dogs that return after the people have disappeared, or the response from bloodhounds, canines, and search dogs, the dogs play a predominant role in many of these disappearances, and the behavior is very unusual. So these dogs sit down. Well, unbeknownst to everybody, about 2,500 feet further up the mountain, there's a husband and wife that are backpacking. And one morning they wake up and they thought they saw something or heard something about 750 feet above them on a rock ledge. They both look up and they see a little boy walk out to a rock ledge, and they're looking at it and they can't believe it. And they only see him for 5-10 seconds, and then the boy turns around and walks back off the ledge, and he's gone. And these people know exactly where this boy was at, and they said there's no way this kid could have gotten to that location without assistance in some means. Well, they didn't know that Alfred had disappeared. They didn't know there was a huge search party until they got home. So Denver read the newspaper, they drive back to the park the following day, and they tell authorities what they saw. And they were shown a picture, and they said, yeah, that was Alfred in their mind. Search parties go up there, and the location where Alfred was seen is a place called Devil's Nest. And I write in the book, and I say that locations in mountains, just like names of lakes, hilltops, ridges, they get these names for a reason.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that question, the way the word devil comes into the names of so many of these places. It's like, yeah, they do get where do the names come from, do you think?
Well, I go back to Native Americans and history and explorers, travelers. But many times these locations, there's something unusual, or there's some unexplained act that occurs there, obviously, that, or maybe there's something evil that's found there. Maybe a hunter's found, and it appears something evil happened to them. It's hard to know why these locations get their names, but as you can see in the stories, that word devil comes up too often.
Too often, exactly. So it goes back then.
Oh, it goes back.
But let's go back to this case. Let's not drop the. Let's go finish this case. It's an incredible case.
So the searchers, 40 people, scour this mountainside for 3 days, and they don't find anything of this boy or any remnants that he was there. Now, as I go further, and I'm not going to explain it all, but there are a series of events that happened at this park, all in the same time frame, that are beyond belief and beyond explanation, that you'll never hear about anywhere else. And unless somebody went there like us and did something stupid like spent days scouring the archive, you'd never hear about it. But it all seems too coincidental that all of these series of events and all of these missing people all occurred within this Rocky Mountain district in a time frame that doesn't make any sense. So there's another cluster of missing, and as you look at the U.S., I mean, there's people missing in Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, and when you think, well, people disappearing in a desert, that seems pretty odd. Yeah, it does seem pretty odd, and when you read the stories, it even seems more odd. So don't think mountaintops or mountainsides or hillsides are exclusive. It's the same thing in deserts, too.
Some of your most extraordinary cases involve people who have been found alive, and what they have said and are not said about what happened to them. Could you tell us about some of those cases?
So many of the people that disappear, and I believe it's an unusual amount per the occurrence of the missing, have a disability. And many of those people with a disability have a speech disability that's in conjunction with that. So they can't really explain what happened. And many times it appears to be an autistic disability, but other times it's just age. A lot of the kids that disappear are so young that they can't tell what happened. And in the instances where they should be able to tell what happened, many times they say, I can't remember. And I'm one of these kind of guys, maybe a mile wide, but I read a lot, and I've read a lot of your work and other researchers. And many of the times it reminds me of the thought process that goes with somebody who's abducted. Initially, they don't remember, but under hypnosis, the recollection comes back to them. And I've always wondered that if I sat down with this group of people and we put them under hypnosis, if they could tell us something that may be quite shocking.
Well, yeah, I think they might be able to. Now, we're going to take another little break here, and when we get back, we're going to be talking about children in a lot more detail. One of the most unique things about the Dreamland Festival is our psychic medium, Marla Fries, who reads the room cold. She simply talks to people in the room, and it is often quite an amazing experience. So, Marla, what are you going to be doing this year?
Well, Whitley, it's been my experience that my personal agenda about how I want my talk to go at the Dreamland Festival goes right out the window when I get there. You see, it's my job to surrender to Spirit's message, not just the messages from our deceased loved ones, but the psychic messages that I hear from the God source, the universal force and consciousness connected to us all. You know, I start listening to the messages before my talk that morning. Right after breakfast, I take notes down, messages, and you know, they're not just for the attendees, but sometimes they're even for the presenters. You remember last year the information that came in about sacred geometry and its meaning? Well, that message wasn't understood until after my talk, when Linda Moulton Howe's presentation, right after me, was about those sacred geometric symbols that were found on the drones. So I invite those who are coming to the festival, and perhaps those who now feel compelled to come, to open their hearts and minds to the possibility of receiving some information about any aspect of their lives, their home, their work, job, health, relationship, even their animals. I trust that our deceased loved ones, as well as Spirit, will share profound messages with all of us, and I can't wait.
Oh, Marla, it sounds so exciting. I'll never forget the time you were talking to a man there, and you suddenly began to address him as if he was somebody's daughter, and it turned out he'd had a sex change operation.
Yes, he had had a sex change. That's correct, Whitley. Well,
he didn't look like a woman at all.
No, not at all. Well, as you know, these experiences can be pretty staggering, pretty profound, and I'm just excited.
Well, thanks very much, Marla Fries, and we'll see you at the Dreamland Festival. Folks, if you're going to come to the Dreamland Festival, you'd better hurry because it always sells out. Go to unknowncountry.com. Get your tickets now. You'll find the store's order point on the upper right hand of the homepage. One of the most disturbing features of this whole thing is missing children, and there are a lot of cases in Missing 411, and I was most appalled by the insensitivity of the National Park Service's unwillingness even to document some of these cases. But we've been there. We know the NPS is failing in its fundamental duty to the American people. We've done that. They do not care, but they're bureaucrats. Why would they? They don't care. I won't go on. Okay. Let's talk now about children and some of these disappearances, Dave, found miles and miles from the original location of the disappearance. Maybe some of them never found, some of them heard screaming it just a few feet away from their parents and then never found again. Can you tell us about some of these cases where the children are actually heard during the process of their disappearance?
Yeah, and in fact, you just hit on a couple of them that are just huge in my mind. I mean, the screams and et cetera are so bothersome that it's unusual. The first one that comes to mind is a boy named Keith Parkins. He disappeared in April 1952 from a rural area in eastern Oregon named Ritter, Oregon. Keith was 2 years old. And his family was visiting his grandparents. And, you know, when you visit your grandparents, you run around the yard, have fun, see the animals. Well, his grandfather